Let's talk about React components. So components are arguably the most important aspect of React because everything works based on components. So a component is essentially a reusable piece of user interface. Yeah? It's a block of user interface that you can reuse many times, and of course you can customize. So let's play an example. So we got a very simplistic web application. So I would like to create our very first component. So function hello. You see? Function, that's the first thing. Whenever we type function, that means that's a stateless component. The majority of your React components should be stateless. Yeah? My suggestion is, until you really understand and you can predict the behavior of your logic, by default, always create a function component. Always, because they are simpler. And then, if you realize that you cannot build what you want, then we can think about converting it into stateful. But 90% of the components should be stateless. So if you're not sure, you create a function. So function hello, and then return div welcome to stateless components. Yeah? It's a function. Only bear in mind that it starts with capital. What's the name of that case, guys? If I call it hello world, that's Pascal, correct? Yeah? So hello world. And then look at the way you reference to the function. You've done that already, everyone, right? Componentizing your stuff. So now if we, even though it's a bit small, yeah, you can see the messages there clearly, right? And that means that I can replicate the component as many times as I want, yeah? That's one of the beautiful aspects of components. You can reuse them. And what if we want to change the behavior a bit? For instance, we want to welcome a user. Welcome to stateless components, comma, Peter, right? So for that, and I'm sure you've seen that as well, we can pass attributes. For instance, name, Peter, name, John, and name, Marie. Yeah? So now, if we got that, how do we display, comma, the name of the person in here?
Between curly braces.
Curly braces, and then what? Name? Are you sure? Component of name? Wait a minute. If I type name, error, unexpected use of name. Props. I like it, keep on. Props, and then what? Props of name, right? Yeah? It works, right? Of course, we can pass other properties, email, age, you know, anything, right? We can pass multiple props. So, but that's the way it works. And also, as some of you mentioned, we can destructure props. We saw that last week, I believe. So how do we destructure props to avoid having to type props.props.props 200 times? How do we do that? Curly brace.
And then name.
Anything else? Will it work?
No, then you should erase props.
Correct. Get rid of props, right? It works. That's it, right? That's it. Stateless components. Easy. So again, generally speaking, you should create stateless components. However, in some particular scenarios, that's not enough. I'll give you an example. Do you know how many times that line will render? 2, 3, 27? I'll tell you something, I don't know. Let's do something. I hope everyone knows how to debug React components already. So if we open DevTools, and then we go to sources, yeah, then you can open a file with Control P on Windows or Command P on Mac. So then I can open my file. You see, I can open my file, and then I can add a breakpoint. This is vital, yeah? So the majority of the questions that some of you have asked on the last hours on the general channel may have quickly solved by just doing that. Adding a breakpoint and see why you cannot get the ID from the URL or you cannot find your TV show, yeah? Why? Because now, if I refresh, yeah, interestingly enough, nothing happens. But I'm pretty sure there's a problem with Google Chrome. Do you remember I told you there were some issues with Google Chrome DevTools? That sometimes happens. Because I'm pretty sure there's a problem with Google Chrome, I'm going to do something. Remember, that may happen in a job interview, right? Open incognito, open the URL again. So essentially start again using incognito window. Sources, app. Yeah, let's see if that works. Let's refresh again. Interestingly enough, still not working. That's not good. That's not good. If that's not working yet, another bit more aggressive thing you can do is you can add something called Debugger. If you type Debugger, oh, it works now. Yeah, so whenever the browser is unable to stop on a breakpoint, you add Debugger, and then generally speaking, it works much better, right? Remember, this is just for testing purposes, so don't leave it in production. Don't deploy to Heroku with the debugger. But at least now, you can see, right? We can inspect the value of your variables. So then you can see the different variables. So even though, obviously, we have free boxes, let's remove 2 of them. So I just want to keep 1 message. How many times we stop here? Only once. Only once. But be careful, because in reality, you don't control that. Whenever you have stateless components, you don't control how many times you will render it, because you may have to render it multiple times. That's why, in some cases, stateless components are not convenient. Let me give you an example. On task number 22, yeah, more or less, you'll have to call the backend. Some of you are working on the backend already, right? You have the front end, you have the backend. So whenever you have to get data from the backend, how many times you want to get data from the backend? Only once. Yeah? If I want to get a list of TV shows, I don't want to get a list of TV shows every 10 seconds. That doesn't make sense. Maybe if you're building a real-time trading app, it may work. But generally speaking, when you get data from the backend, you fetch once. And if you want to fetch again, you refresh the page. Yeah? So then, if you want to get data from the backend, you cannot use stateless component. Why? Because if I do something like that, yeah, you will see that on task 22, line 16 may run 20 times. That's not good. Imagine that you are using Callflex on your phone. Yeah? It may drain your data plan. You don't want to call the backend 20 times. So, what do we do when we need to call the backend? Or I'll give you another example. There is another classic scenario where we cannot use a stateless component, historically speaking. If we have user interaction, for instance, we have a button. Imagine we have a button. That's the last board challenge we did on Friday, right? So whenever we click on the button, we refresh the component. We update the user interface by showing details, hiding details, whatever. Yeah. So whenever there is user interaction, we cannot use stateless components. So in these 2 scenarios, we need a stateful component. And how do we create a stateful component? Let me rewrite it. I'll leave it there for reference purposes. Or let me rename it to stateless. Yeah. So I'm going to create a similar one with a stateful. So stateful components are classes. That's the first thing. So class, name of the class, hello world, stateful. And then this is important. Week number 7 will cover the details. Has to extends React.component. So why is that? That's a way to tell, hey, this is a class. So class belongs to JavaScript, but that component is going to be compatible with React. Yeah, that's why we need to use extends. All right. Does anyone know how to display some stuff using a stateful component? Constructor, not really. Render, correct, Seb. We can create methods. You see? Why render? Because according to React, according to React.component, you can create a method called render, and React will automatically invoke it. Yeah? That's why this is important. And then as part of render, we can return the same thing. Almost. Welcome to stateful components. And now, how do we bind? We cannot use name. No, that's not correct. So how can we bind with a property that we are passing literally now? Stateful. Does anyone know? Props. What else? The name? That's the key, right? Whenever we have a class, that means a stateful component, we need to refer to this dot many times. And that makes everything just more complicated. But it is what it is, right? So you can see these two these two components are equivalent. Well, let's have a look. Will it work? Yeah, you see? Same thing, right? Same thing. So, if our goal is just to display a paragraph, to me that doesn't really make sense. It's overcomplicated. You see, we need to remember to use extend, we need to remember to create render, we need to remember to deal with this.props. It's just more complicated. Yeah, you agree on that? Even though it's correct, it works. But that's not the reason why stateful components exist. The reason why they exist is because we can interact with them. So,
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because in the other case, prop was first passed as a parameter. And in this case, you then change it because you deconstruct the structure.
Yeah, but that's the same. That's the same. Even if you don't deconstruct it, look, props.
Yeah. No, but my question is, in the stateful.
Yeah.
How does prop works if you haven't passed it as a parameter? If you haven't declared it?
It works magically because you don't pass it. With a function, it's very explicit. You pass the argument props. But with a class, you don't pass any argument, you see? There are no parentheses or anything like that. It's just magic. JavaScript works in that way. Yeah? Whenever you pass an attribute, that attribute will be available immediately using this.props. That's React and JavaScript magic, right? You need to believe it.
Okay.
It's like religion at some point, right? You need to trust it. All right, so according to this religion, these two examples are equivalent. But again, the advantage of classes is that they are way more powerful. So for simple things, they don't pay off. But for complex things, they do. So we can declare a bunch of methods. For instance, constructor. So the constructor, this is important, is the very first method that React will execute. Does anyone remember what we need to put whenever we create a constructor? Super, correct. Fantastic. There is another very important method called, you may have heard about it, component did mount. That's React magic. So React will call that method. Yeah? So now, if I add a console log, constructor, yeah? I add another console log on component did mount, and I add a third console log on render. This is a classic job interview question. Now let's do something. Back to the app, I'm adding 3 breakpoints. 20, 24, and 28. So here the goal is to understand the sequence that React follows. Can anyone tell me the execution order? So who's that? Was Farage? So 20, 20, 28, 24. Why is that? Well, Farage is right. Look, if we refresh the page, well, nothing happens because of the debugger thingy, but that's okay. Let's add the debugger. Say again? It was too easy, right? Right. Look, 20, 25. So first of all, 20, 29, and 25, right? The very first method is the constructor. That was expected, easy. And then what? Is it component did mount or is it render? Let's have a look. Oh, it's render. Farage is right. So after we construct the component, we render it. And once the component has been rendered, once it's displayed, look, you see? On the left-hand side, the component is visible, is there, the user can interact with it, and then we run the component did mount. Yeah? That's the sequence. First constructor, then render, and then component did mount. Make sense? All right, so let's do some user interaction. I want to add a button, so whenever I click on the button, let's, for instance, reveal user age. Yeah, let's do a bit of gossip. Age of Peter is 65. Not on the stateless, on the stateful. All right, so look, I'm going to carefully add a button. You see? And the button text will be reveal age, something like that. And now, so I can pass an on-click event. So whenever the user clicks on the button, I'm going to trigger an action. So what's the action? Well, essentially, I need to declare a new method. And the method name will be toggle user age. That was the last board challenge. Yeah, I'm not doing anything new actually. So toggle user age. So now, here I can bind with that method. Can anyone tell me how to invoke toggle user age here? Correct. Again, every time you have a React component stateful, you need to use this dot toggle user age, something like that. And now in here, let's add a console.log method invoked. Smoke test. Let's see if the console log gets displayed or not. Does it make sense? Yeah? All right. So, we don't need the breakpoints, I believe. Yeah, now it's out of control. Yeah, I got my button here. So, whenever I click on the button, I expect the breakpoint to stop on line number 29. Right. Even though the breakpoint is not working, I hope you can see that in reality it is working, right? So let's ignore the breakpoints because they are a source of problems, to be honest, today. But can you see the message at the bottom? Yeah? So we are binding it's working correctly. But now, how can we display the age? So if we do, now we do age colon what? Correct, this.props.age, right? If we do that, let me get rid of the debugger. We don't need it anymore. So let's ignore the breakpoints, guys. And let me comment the stateless component, because otherwise it makes everything just a bit more confusing. You see? Well, obviously ignoring the spaces, blah, blah, blah. Does anyone remember how to add a space in between these two lines? Yeah, but I'm not going to do that. Yeah, MBSP, that's the HTML code. Yeah, and then you see, we got the space. Right, that's not the main thing of the workshop, so don't worry. So, the thing is, the AH is already visible, but I want to toggle it. Yeah? If I click, visible. If I click again, invisible. So whenever we have to change the user interface according to a user action, we need to create state. And that's the main thing of stateful components, that they support state. That's why they are called stateful components, right? All right, so how do we create the state? That's very important. First of all, we need to, let's get rid of the console logs, initialize the state. This.state equals an object. Generally speaking, the state is an object. So let's create a Boolean flag. Is age visible? So what's the default value? It doesn't matter, right? Let's hide it by default. So by default, age is not visible. And now, when we click on the button, we want to toggle it. Does anyone remember how to change the state? That's task number 13, right? So you may remember that. This does set a state, and then what? Like that? Is age visible? Exclamation mark what? No. Like that?
No, you change the column with equal.
The column with equal? Or with asterisk, maybe? What about percent? That's 13. The majority of you have done task 13. This is vital, right? So if in a job interview you struggle on that line, mentally speaking, the interviewer will discard you immediately, right? So you cannot hesitate here. Yeah? React training intermediate state, vital, the most important one on the entire bootcamp. How do we initialize the state? Passing an object. So here, we need to pass another object. So set the state receives an object. But I'm not convinced about the right-hand side. Well, if you change it to false, no. To true, no. We want to toggle. How do we toggle? We negate what? Esteban, got it. This dot state dot what? Correct, is age visible. That's the way it works. And that's good, because here you learn, first of all, how to read the state. How to read the state. Is this dot state dot is age visible. And also, you learn how to edit, how to manipulate, how to update this state. Yeah? Is age visible. This dot set state. All right, so now, hopefully, is age visible will help us to determine whether this is visible or not. But now, we need to do something here, because at the moment it's still hard-coded. It's ignoring the state. So, how do we decide whether the age is visible according to the is age visible flag? How do we do that? we can pass an object. We can say this dot state dot is h visible. Then what? This is JavaScript, right? So we can say dh is this.props.h. Else, whatever, h hidden. Something like that. You see? Ternary. On the render function, depending on the value of is h visible, we decide to render the h or not. From the user interface point of view, let's see what happened. This is going to be controversial. This is not going to work, probably. Let's see why. It didn't work, and it threw an error. Big error. That's the most typical error when you start dealing with a state. Cannot read property, set a state of undefined. In other words, this is undefined. We've lost it. We've lost it. It was okay here because we proved that we can bind with the method, but now here line number 28 is gone, is missing. What is it? We don't know. That's the most controversial part of React, in my opinion. How complicated is to keep lexical Ds up to date. For now, I'm going to show you how to do it. And on week number 7, no, that's probably week number 8, that's the last week of the bootcamp, we'll go through the details. The easiest way to satisfy the appetite of React is to type here .bind this, which is weird. I'm not against that, but whenever you do that, when creating a button, you tell React, hey, call that method, but remember to use our this object. Yeah, that's the way it works. So if we run it again, look. You see? Now it works. So, one last thing from my side. If we add a breakpoint, I'm not going to add any breakpoints. Well, yes, let me add a breakpoint. It will be easier to visualize. So I'm adding a breakpoint. Let's see if now it stops in there or not. Yeah, okay. So if I add a breakpoint on the following lines, which are component did mount, toggle user age, render, and constructor, which is there already. It's going to be a bit hard to visualize, but let's do our best. You see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4 breakpoints. So, on render, if I refresh the page, what's the execution order? Sorry, I'll show you in a second. I know this is hard to read. So, sorry, what do you say? So who's talking? Jack? 20, 20, 33? 29. I'm just refreshing the page. $29. That's it?
Sorry, and 25
25 and?
And then 29.
And then 29. What do you think? I'm only refreshing the page. Do you all agree? Does anyone disagree? Esteban disagrees? Why Esteban disagrees? So will the breakpoint stop on line number 29 or not? No. If we are just refreshing the page, look, 20, 33, correct, 25, of course, is not going to stop on 29. We haven't clicked the button, right? Yet, not yet. But now, let's click the button. If I click on the button, if the breakpoints work, which I'm not sure, let's try. If I click on the button, what's the execution order? Katerina, you don't know. I don't know. So you said if I click on the button, 20, 33, 25. Right, guys, I want numbers. 1 point on the board challenge. No, you already talked, Jack. That was too late. Anyone else apart from Jack? 1 point? 1.25 points? Every 5 seconds, I give you. Oh, you see, people quickly start. Bilal? 20, 33. Remember, I'm going to click on the button, eh?
25 and 29.
All right, 1.4 points. 45, 50. If you are waiting, at some point I'm going to start decreasing, so don't wait until tomorrow. Don't play that game. Sonia?
20.
Right, Sonia, 20, wrong. Next, 75. I'm not going to refresh, I'm just going to click on the button. So wait, that was Farage. 25, 33, and 20. So 25, okay, wrong. Wait, Katerina. 29 and 23.
I have another option.
And Sebastian has another option.
29, 33, 25.
Okay, cool. So Katerina gets 1.85 points. We can round it to 2 points, unless you disagree. Or to 1, to 2, right? It's closer. Cool. So Katerina gets 2 points because she's right. Look, what's the main problem? Guys, it doesn't really make sense to stop on the constructor. It only happens once. Constructor happens only once, forever, unless you refresh the page. Yeah? No, I said clearly, I'm not going to refresh the page anymore. I'm just going to click on the button, right? So you don't stop on line number 20. So that's wrong. And then, it won't stop on component in mount neither. Component in mount will only happen once, only once, yeah? So, wrong. So if I click on the button, first of all, it will call toggle user aids. That's the first thing. Yeah, easy. And then the important thing here about set state is every time you call set state, React will re-render. Because if you change the state, it's because you want to change the user interface. And how do we change the user interface? By re-rendering, right? That's why if I press on the button, right, now it's not working because of the debugger thingy, but let me add quickly a debugger so we can visualize it. So this is refresh, ignore that. Yep, and now by pressing on the button, you see 29, it didn't stop on 20, it didn't stop on 25, and now, oh God, I need to add another debugger on the render. No, that's a bit unfortunate, but anyway. So listen, I'm going to add debugger on every single method, just to prove that I'm not lying or anything like that. So I'm refreshing, ignore that. We already discussed that. And now I'm pressing on the button. 29, and then it will stop on 34, on the render. That's it. Why? Because again, every time you change the state, it's because you want to update the UI, so you want to re-render. That's the way it works, right? So in this particular case, stateful components are mandatory, are a must. Because with the stateless components, you don't have a state. If you don't have a state, you cannot re-render. Yeah, that's the way it works. However, even though that has been like that for 4 years, earlier this year, or maybe towards the end of the last year, something was introduced in React that completely changed everything. Yeah? Does anyone know what?
Hooks.
Hooks, correct. So with hooks, and this is not part of this workshop, we can emulate the behavior of a stateful component using a stateless component. Yeah? I told you before that there were essentially 2 ways or 2 reasons why we should use stateful components. One was user interaction, another one was fetching data from the backend. Yeah? So user interaction can be implemented using hooks, and also we can even call the backend using a stateless component, using something called use effect for the future. Yeah? So in other words, what's the trend? Or where we come from? We come from a world where the separation between stateful and stateless components was very bold. It was clear when to use one and when to use the other. However, the community realized that working with stateful components is exhausting. The syntax is a bit complicated. You need to remember many things. You need to remember how to use this. You need to remember to bind. Because of that, the way React has been evolving over the last month is to implement new capabilities, add new features to stateless so they can eventually replace the stateful components. As an example, on the challenge we played on last Tuesday, 1 week ago, 8 days ago, React Expert, I think no one used a stateful component. No one. And that tells you where the industry goes. In the long term, I believe no one will use stateful components. But to achieve that level, you need to understand really well React lifecycle. So keep that in mind, where the future goes, hooks, use effect. But for now, for the short term, 90% of the time, use stateless components. Whenever you have to deal with A, user interaction, B, fetching data from the backend, then use stateful. And that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Going back to JavaScript, in which cases we may need classes instead of functions?
Yeah, that's controversial. So historically speaking, JavaScript didn't support classes. Yeah? As soon as JavaScript started becoming popular, 2009, 10, especially 2011, more and more backend developers moved to JavaScript, Java, C#, and the first thing they notice is, hey, I'm used to play with classes. What are classes here? No classes at all. Yeah? Because of all the pressure of backend developers, starting from 2015, now JavaScript supports classes. But they are controversial. Yeah? Classic JavaScript developers like me, we are not big fans of classes because we believe that they don't offer a big value. Yeah? JavaScript is a functional programming language. That means that you can build everything right within functions. Yeah?
More or less, we don't need them.
Well, if you're using React, you need them, but even if you need them, you can see that the JavaScript community is trying to move away from them. Yeah, Bilal?
So this class here is the reason why we use class name in the HTML?
Yeah, correct, that's correct, Bilal. Because of that class word, that's why we need to use class name to avoid conflicts. Yeah? Anything else, guys? No? Cool, so that was it. Thank you.